Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's topic because we are embarking on a fascinating journey into the secretive, deeply complex evolution of Vatican finance. Today, we're going to unpack the history, the controversies, and the ultimate reforms of the Vatican Bank. We'll break down the timeline, look at the major players, and understand exactly how one of the most spiritual institutions on Earth navigates the incredibly complicated world of global money.
Section 1. The Mystery of God's Banker. London, June 1982. To really get a grasp on this, we have to rewind to a foggy morning in London 1982. Down near Blackfriars Bridge, investigators stumble upon a truly shocking scene. They find a man who is deeply connected to one of Italy's absolute biggest banking failures. His name was Roberto Calvi, and he was the former chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, which was a massive Italian private bank. This unsettling discovery immediately set off international alarm bells. Why? Because Calvi wasn't just any banker.
The press actually gave him a rather striking nickname, God's Banker. And he earned this moniker because Banco Ambrosiano had these incredibly complex, deeply opaque financial links straight to Vatican institutions. We're talking about a tangled web of highly private ties connecting a high-stakes Italian financier directly to the Holy See.
Which brings us to the central puzzle of this entire explainer. I really want you to keep this driving question in mind as we go through the rest of this journey together. How exactly did a spiritual institution become connected to such intense modern financial controversy? Well, to figure that out, we have to look past the myths and understand the actual mechanics of the bank itself.
Section 2. Birth of Vatican Finance. Understanding the IOR. Okay, let's strip away all that Hollywood mystery for a second. The official name of the Vatican Bank is the Institute for the Works of Religion, or the IOR. Now, it is crucial to realize this was established for a highly specific purpose. It exists strictly to serve Catholic religious institutions, religious orders, clergy, and Vatican employees. And the whole thing operates entirely within the walls of a sovereign city-state.
You can really see what makes the IOR so unique when you contrast it with a normal commercial bank. Think of your standard, everyday bank on the high street. It serves the general public, right? It's got wide public visibility. But the Vatican Bank? Totally different story. A tourist can't just stroll into Vatican City and open a checking account. It serves a heavily restricted list of Catholic entities and operates with notoriously limited public visibility. Now, that intense privacy made it powerful, for sure, but it also made it incredibly difficult to supervise from the outside.
Let's look at how this builds chronologically. It all kicks off in 1929 with the Lateran Treaty. This agreement ended a massive long-running conflict between the Church and the Italian state, basically creating Vatican City as an independent nation. But here's the kicker for our story. The Holy See received a huge influx of modern wealth, cash and Italian government bonds, as compensation for lost territories. Suddenly, they had serious money on their hands. So they brought in an Italian financier named Bernardino Nogara to professionally manage it. But as we'll see, managing that kind of wealth got deeply complicated, eventually spiraling into a massive international crisis by the 1970s and 80s.
Section 3. The Reputation Crisis. The Banco Ambrosiano Fallout.
By the 1980s, this incredibly complex web had formed around three central figures. You had Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who was running the IOR. You had Michele Sindona, an international financier who specialized in complicated offshore structures. And of course, Roberto Calvi, the chairman of Banco Ambrosiano. Banco Ambrosiano created these deeply opaque financial links using shell companies scattered across different jurisdictions. And the Vatican Bank got tangled up in all of this through letters of patronage, essentially financial guarantees. And these arrangements were so convoluted that international regulators found them almost impossible to fully unravel.
Well, when Banco Ambrosiano finally collapsed in 1982, it left behind a staggering financial gap. The Vatican firmly denied any legal responsibility for the failure. However, they did later agree to pay a really large settlement to the creditors, framing it as a gesture of moral responsibility. The stark lesson here is pretty undeniable. When money flows through systems with weak transparency, the reputation of even the most trusted historic institutions can take a severe beating for decades.
Section 4. The Cash-Only Turning Point. A Catalyst for Change.
So reform actually came pretty slowly after that era. But fast forward to January 2013, and something incredibly symbolic happens that practically forced the Vatican's hand toward modernization. Regulators completely suspended all electronic card payments inside Vatican City. Just picture this. You've got tourists visiting the world-famous Vatican museums or trying to buy a souvenir, and suddenly they are desperately digging through their pockets for cash. Why? Because Italian regulators were flat out not satisfied that the Vatican systems met modern financial compliance and transaction monitoring standards. It was a massive wake-up call, proving that state sovereignty alone just isn't enough. If global regulators don't trust your financial systems, your normal services will literally just stop.
Later that exact same year, Pope Francis was elected, and he didn't waste any time taking rigorous steps to clean things up. First, outside specialists were brought in to scrub the accounts. Second, they aggressively reviewed and then blocked or closed questionable accounts. Third, they brought in way stricter identity checks and documentation rules. And finally, they ramped up their cooperation with international monitoring bodies like Moneyval, Europe's anti-money laundering watchdog. Pope Francis basically made the institution smaller, hyper-focused, and highly professional.
Which actually brings us to a somewhat funny but very true point. In finance, boring is often a really good sign. And honestly, that is exactly what the Vatican Bank became. By the mid-2020s, it completely transformed into a highly regulated, heavily audited, and intentionally boring entity. It publishes audited reports, has super strong internal controls, and operates with a level of transparency that literally just did not exist before. But, as you might guess, reforming the Vatican Bank didn't magically erase all financial risk across the rest of Vatican City.
Section 5. The London Property Problem. Ongoing Risks.
Hundreds of millions of euros. That is what we're talking about here. You see, a whole new problem popped up, but not from the IOR. This time, it was from the Secretariat of State, which is another incredibly powerful Vatican office. They invested this staggering amount of money into a luxury property project at 60 Sloane Avenue in London. And wow, did this deal get complicated. It was incredibly expensive and quickly morphed into a major historic controversy.
If we break down the London case, the core issue was pretty clear. Vatican prosecutors argued that weak oversight and really murky decision-making led to some serious financial losses. What this proved was that financial risk absolutely still existed outside the newly reformed IOR. But here's the crucial outcome. Senior Vatican figures were actually investigated and put on trial inside Vatican City's own court system. That was huge. It showed the Vatican was finally willing to use public legal processes to hold its own senior figures accountable. It proved that while major reform is very real, the hard work of achieving total financial oversight isn't entirely finished.
Section 6. Balancing Faith and Finance. The Modern Reality.
So, where does all this leave us today? Well, the IOR currently serves a highly restricted client base. We're talking religious orders, Catholic institutions, Vatican employees, clergy, and diplomats connected to the Holy See. That is it. Its day-to-day functions are super practical now, managing standard salary accounts, processing international transfers, and handling the funds that directly support the Pope's religious and charitable work all around the globe. It's honestly far less dramatic than its history.
But this whole journey brings up an enduring central tension that the Vatican is always going to face. It has this unique dual nature. On one hand, it's a sovereign state that absolutely has to operate securely within the insanely complex, highly regulated world of global finance. But on the other hand, it's a religious institution. It has to maintain deep moral authority and stick to its spiritual mission. It basically has to figure out how to manage massive amounts of money without ever letting that money define its core purpose.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought to really chew on. Can a spiritual institution wield significant financial power without eventually losing its spiritual purpose? This collision of faith, money, and responsibility is a constant balancing act, and it's one the Vatican continues to navigate every single day. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this truly fascinating history. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time on The Explainer.